Clara Hendricks was 43 years old and had been photographing her own fence line since the day she took possession of the farm. Not because anyone had told her to, not because she had read something in an agricultural bulletin about documentation practices or evidence preservation. She did it because she had watched her father spend 31 years caring for land that belonged to someone else, learning every wet corner and every dry ridge of a leased hay farm in Caldwell County, Kentucky, understanding its soil the way some men understood their own children, and then standing in a gravel parking lot outside a county courthouse at 57 with nothing to show for any of it, when the owner decided to sell to a developer and Harold Hendricks's name appeared on exactly none of the paperwork that mattered. Clara had been 19 that day. She had stood beside her father and understood, watching him fold the eviction notice into his shirt pocket with the particular stillness of a man who had seen this coming and still had no way to stop it, that knowledge and ownership were two entirely different questions, and that the world only recognized one of them when things went wrong. She had spent the next 20 years making sure every decision she made on her own land left something behind that could be verified. The farm sat on 78 acres in Tilden County, Tennessee, 54 Angus cows, a 32-acre hayfield that produced enough winter feed in a good year to carry the herd through to the first week of April without purchasing a single outside bale. A modest farmhouse her husband, Robert, had helped her renovate the summer before his heart gave out, 6 years earlier, when the kitchen still smelled like fresh paint, and neither of them had any reason yet to think about what the farm would look like managed by one person instead of two. She had managed it alone since then, before daylight every morning. Fences, water tanks, pasture walks, equipment maintenance, the particular endless arithmetic of keeping a small cattle operation running without the kind of debt that turned farming into a life, not a sentence. It was not easy work. It was the only work Clara had ever wanted. Beyond her western fence line, separated from her hayfield by a single wire gate latched with a chain and a standard livestock latch, sat the Alderman operation, 1,400 acres. Wade Alderman was 50 years old, drove a black pickup with his ranch name in white lettering on both doors, and had expanded his holdings steadily across the past decade in the particular way that certain operations expand when the man running them has confused size with accomplishment. He was not cruel, exactly. He was the kind of man who had gotten his way often enough that the possibility of not getting it had genuinely stopped occurring to him as a realistic outcome. He had approached Clara 3 times in 2 years about buying her farm. The first time, she had thanked him and said no. The second time, she had said only no. The third time, the previous November, he had driven up her driveway unannounced, stood on her porch with his hat in his hands, and told her she was being sentimental about a piece of ground that would make her considerably more money sold than farmed. Clara had looked at him for a long moment before answering. "My father spent 30 years farming land he didn't own. I own this land. Those are different situations, and I intend to keep them different." Wade had smiled the smile of a man filing something under "not yet" and driven back down the gravel driveway. Clara had gone inside and written the date, the time, and a summary of the conversation in the same notebook she had been keeping since she bought the property. It was a Tuesday morning in late May, just past 7 when she saw the movement at the far end of the hayfield. The hay was 3 weeks from harvest, thick and green, the kind of growth that represented not just feed, but the difference between a year that worked financially and a year that didn't. Clara was walking the eastern fence line with her phone in her hand, the same morning walk she had done every day for 15 years, when she counted 1 dark shape crossing the grass, then 4, then a dozen, then more than she could count before she was already moving. 63 black Angus cattle belonging to Wade Alderman crossed her hayfield that morning and did in 2 hours what would have taken Clara 2 good growing seasons to recover from properly. She ran toward the western fence, waving her arms and shouting. The cattle ignored her. By the time she reached the boundary fence, they had already spread across nearly every section of the field, and the particular sick feeling of watching something you have spent months building be destroyed in front of you in real time is not one that has a clean description. It simply sits in your chest and stays there. She noticed the black pickup parked on the ridge beyond her fence line, far enough that she couldn't see through the windshield, close enough that whoever was inside could see everything happening below them in the field. Clara did not wave. She did not walk toward the fence to confront whoever was sitting in that truck. She pulled out her phone and began filming. She filmed the cattle spread across the field. She filmed the flattened hay, the deep hoofprints pressed into soil that had been carefully managed for weeks, the long, dark trails where dozens of animals had walked before fanning out to graze. She filmed the western gate, which was standing open, and then she walked to the gate and photographed the latch from 4 different angles. The chain was intact. The latch itself showed no damage. The hinges were sound. Nothing about the gate suggested it had failed. It had simply been opened and left that way. By the time the county sheriff arrived, the ridge above the western fence was empty. Wade Alderman's pickup was gone. It took nearly 2 hours to move all 63 cattle back onto Alderman land. Wade arrived during that process, easy and unhurried, wearing the expression of a man attending a minor inconvenience he had nothing to do with causing. "Looks like we both had a rough morning," he said. Clara said nothing. She kept filming. "Cows get out," Wade said pleasantly. "These things happen." The sheriff inspected the gate carefully, tested the hinges, examined the latch, found nothing mechanically wrong with any of it. He was a reasonable man doing his job reasonably, and his job required evidence rather than suspicion, and suspicion was all Clara had to offer him at that particular moment. "Unless someone saw the gate being opened," he told her, not without sympathy, "I can only log this as escaped livestock." Clara thanked him. She didn't argue. She went back to photographing the field. That evening, an older farmer named Walter Briggs pulled into her driveway. Walter had lived in Tilden County long enough to remember when the Alderman land had been 3 separate family farms before Wade's father had absorbed them one at a time over a span of 20 years. He climbed out of his truck and stood looking at the damaged field with his arms folded. "I've seen Alderman cattle get loose before," he said after a long moment. Clara looked at him. "More times than I could easily count," Walter said. "But here's the thing I always noticed. They never seemed to wander onto empty ground." "Where did they wander?" Walter thought about it. Fresh alfalfa, a newly seeded pasture, someone's oat field the week before harvest. He shook his head slowly. "I never proved anything. I just thought it was a peculiar kind of accident that kept finding the most expensive possible thing to land on." After Walter left, Clara sat on her porch with her laptop and searched every public record she could find. County Commission minutes, the Tilden County Gazette archive going back 12 years, agricultural complaint filings. It took her until past midnight to build a clear picture, but when she had it, the picture was not complicated. 5 separate incidents involving Alderman cattle on neighboring properties over the previous decade. 3 of those properties had sold within 18 months of the incident. Wade Alderman, or a company connected to him, had purchased 2 of them. She opened a new notebook and wrote down every date, every name, every location. Then she went to the folder on her laptop where she stored her drone footage. This was the detail she had not yet mentioned to anyone, not to Walter, not to the sheriff, not to the attorney she was already planning to call in the morning. For the past 14 months, Clara had been flying her drone over the property twice a week as a matter of routine pasture management, checking fence lines and grass coverage and the condition of the western boundary where a drainage issue had needed monitoring. The footage was stored chronologically, every flight labeled by date, and she had never once deleted any of it because Harold Hendricks' daughter did not throw away the name of a lawyer she might someday need. The attorney, a woman named Ruth Calloway, who had handled agricultural property disputes for 22 years, watched both pieces of drone footage twice without speaking. Then she looked at Clara across the conference table. "This changes the shape of what you have. This isn't a single incident anymore. This is a documented pattern of preparation." Clara nodded. She already knew that. She had known it since 11:30 the previous night. What followed was not fast, and it was not simple. Agricultural property damage cases never are, and Ruth was precise about managing Clara's expectations from the beginning. The drone footage established that someone in a vehicle registered to the Alderman operation had been at that gate on 2 separate occasions before the cattle incident. It did not, by itself, establish that Wade Alderman personally ordered any of it. Intent was a different standard from presence, and courts required the former to be demonstrated rather than simply implied. Ruth hired an independent agricultural consultant to document the field damage properly. A hay production specialist calculated the financial loss across multiple categories: the destroyed standing crop, replacement winter feed costs, reseeding, soil recovery, additional fertilizer, labor, and equipment use. Nothing was estimated without measurement. Every figure was supported by current market data and accepted agricultural methodology. The total was considerably larger than Clara had expected, and she had expected it to be large. Meanwhile, word moved through Tilden County the way word always moves through farming communities, which is thoroughly and faster than the people involved would prefer. At the feed store, at the grain elevator, at the diner where Wade Alderman ate breakfast most mornings, people talked about the lawsuit Clara had filed with the particular interest that attaches to a conflict between unequal parties. Most assumed it would settle quickly. Wade Alderman had resources and a lawyer and years of practice at making problems go away before they became problems of record. What Wade did not have and did not know he was missing was any awareness of what Clara had stored on her laptop. The hearing was held in Tilden County General Sessions Court on a Wednesday morning in October. The courtroom was modest and the gallery was not full, but the people who were there had come specifically to see this particular case, and they sat quietly while Ruth Calloway laid out her evidence in the careful, unhurried sequence she had spent 2 months assembling. The agricultural consultant testified first. The damage assessment, the aerial comparisons, the financial calculations, each one supported by receipts, measurements, and professional methodology. Then, Ruth introduced the drone footage from the morning of the incident, showing the cattle spread across the field before they were gathered. She introduced Clara's photographs of the undamaged gate latch, establishing that the gate had not failed but had been opened deliberately. Then she introduced the 2 earlier clips, 6 weeks before the incident, 10 weeks before, the black pickup, the figure at the gate, the latch being tested and then the gate being swung partially open and closed again. The gallery was very quiet during both clips. Wade Alderman's attorney argued that the vehicle in the footage could not be definitively linked to his client personally, that ranch vehicles were operated by multiple employees, and that the presence of a truck at a shared fence line proved nothing about intent. He was correct about all of this, which is why Ruth had already anticipated the next part. The ranch hand who appeared in the earliest drone footage had resigned from the Alderman operation 4 weeks after the cattle incident. He had not been difficult to locate. He testified under oath that he had driven to Clara's western fence on the instruction of Wade Alderman on 2 separate occasions in the weeks before the incident, that he had been told to check whether the gate latch could be operated easily from the outside, and that on the morning of the incident he had received a call at 4:45 in the morning instructing him to open the gate before first light. He testified further that he had understood from the context of those instructions and from a comment Wade had made about Clara's farm after the 3rd purchase offer was refused, what the purpose of leaving the gate open was intended to be. He did not say Wade Alderman had ordered him to destroy a hayfield. He said Wade Alderman had told him the gate needed to be left open and that he had understood why. The distinction mattered legally, and Ruth acknowledged it directly. The testimony established the instruction, the drone footage established the preparation, the agricultural assessment established the loss, the gate photographs established that nothing had failed accidentally. Each piece was incomplete by itself. Together, they built something the court could weigh. The judge took the matter under consideration and issued his written ruling 11 days later. He found in favor of Clara Hendricks. The judgment covered the documented loss of the standing hay crop, replacement winter feed costs, reseeding and soil restoration, additional fertilizer and labor, expert assessment costs as permitted, and court costs. Every figure matched the evidence presented. The ruling made specific note that the pattern of preparation documented in the drone footage, combined with the testimony establishing the instruction to open the gate, supported a finding that the damage had not resulted from escaped livestock, but from a deliberate act. Clara read the ruling standing at her kitchen counter, the same place she had stood the morning after the incident, making notes in her notebook while the field was still torn up outside. She felt something settle. Not triumph, something quieter than that, the particular relief of a thing that has been carried a long time being set down carefully in the right place. The field took the rest of the autumn and the following spring to fully recover. Reseeding in September, fertilizer applications timed to the soil temperature, patient weeks of monitoring growth and moisture. By the following May, standing at the edge of the western field just after sunrise, it was genuinely difficult to see where the damage had been. The grass was even and thick and green, rolling slightly in the morning wind the way it always did when the season had gone well. Walter Briggs stopped his truck at the gate and got out, leaning on the top rail the way he had leaned on fences his entire adult life. "Field looks like it forgot what happened to it," he said. Clara looked out across the hay. "Land doesn't forget," she said. "It just keeps working." A few weeks later, she was loading equipment into the barn when she heard a vehicle slow on the county road. She looked up. A black pickup with white lettering on the doors was moving past at a reduced speed, the driver visible through the window looking out at the recovered field, at the new fence hardware on the western gate, at the motion-activated camera mounted on the post above the latch. Wade Alderman did not stop. He did not roll down his window. He drove on until the pickup disappeared past the tree line at the end of the road. Clara watched until it was gone. She thought about her father standing in a parking lot with an eviction notice folded into his shirt pocket, knowing something was gone that no court had ever been asked to protect. She thought about 31 years of careful work that had left nothing behind because the right documentation had never existed. Then she turned back to the barn and went back to work. The evening round still needed doing. The water tanks needed checking. There was always another thing that needed doing on a farm, and that had never once felt like a burden to Clara Hendricks. It felt like evidence, steady, daily, accumulating evidence that this land was still in the hands of someone who knew exactly what it was worth. She closed the barn door behind her and walked back out to the western fence one final time that evening. The gate stood exactly where it had stood the morning 63 cattle had come through it. New hinges now, a heavy-duty latch that required deliberate operation to open, a camera overhead with a clear line of sight to the county road in both directions. Not because Clara expected trouble, because Harold Hendricks's daughter had learned at 19 years old, standing in a parking lot watching her father lose everything he knew, that preparation is not pessimism. It is simply what careful people do with the time between the thing they fear and the moment they are asked to prove it happened.